Hey, Lennart. All right. Let's look through this work. Okay, so my first reaction is kind of reminds me of Cynic's stuff, I guess, in some of the proportions you're using. That's not necessarily a bad thing at all, so that's my first impression. Kind of like it better with the lines in some cases. You've got kind of a messy thing going on here. And it looks like your brush that you're using has a lot of texture to it, which is okay. But some of these marks seem to be random. And what I mean is they don't quite follow the form. And when you have a textured brush, you really want to follow the form more. So just for instance, let's say you have this nose and you're doing these kind of like diagonal marks like that. Instead of that, try and go around like that, go around the form. Like think a lot more about your brush strokes, about each individual one. If you're gonna be doing this type of technique, it's really important because it shows off your brushwork a lot. And because it's so strong, it has to be correct. Excuse me. So one of the things is think about the planes. If you're familiar with planes, that's good. If not, I would definitely study the planes of the face. So that is understanding the face in kind of a form like this. Like, okay, so that's one plane basically. You have the forehead, and then this is another plane. This is another plane. You've got the nose, and it sort of splits into planes like this. And I think there are quite a few resources in terms of finding, what the planes are. So here you have eye sockets, and within the eye sockets, you have the eyeballs. So when you have this shadow that comes right across from here to here, it's not telling us anything about what's actually happening in these areas. Like you have a shadow, but where's the light coming from? The shadow should always point to where the light is coming from. So let's say you had the light coming from the top. Okay, well, you would look for all the planes that are facing not the top, so the bottom planes. You put that in, you would color this in, but then you wouldn't really have this colored in. So maybe it would be an in-between tone, something more like that maybe. Fine. Okay, and then maybe the part that's facing more of the light would get even brighter. So this is gonna look a bit blocky because, well, I'm trying to show you the method for, seeing planes. So I'm exaggerating it a bit, but it should get the point across, What you would look at this, and you would look at this part of the eye, and you'd say, well, what value is that going to be, and why? So maybe it is a tiny bit darker because you've got the lower lid, but that's going to be localized to the lower lid area, right? Like if you have a lower lid on this side, right? Maybe it's here, and it's around this part. So that part's all going to be darker, but then this part around might actually be catching a highlight. So what I feel is you're really experimenting a lot with technique and style to get a stylish image, but your understanding, basically your fundamentals are kind of not quite there yet. And I think it would really help to work on things like the planes of the face to understand, what are these things? Because they're not just random things that you put down, they all mean something. Every time you have a shadow, every time you have a value change, so let's say from this to this, you're telling the viewer something. You're telling the viewer that this form is turning. So in the front of the face, it might not be that apparent, but from the side view, it really is. If you think about, okay, so I'll just draw a generic side view of a head, right? So that's like the forehead, this is the nose, then you have the lip, upper lip, lower lip, and the chin, okay? So you'll notice these are all facing different directions. So let's just treat this as if it was a flat thing. Like obviously it's not flat. There's 3 dimensions. You have the nostril and the eyes and whatever. But let's just imagine this was a flat shape. So I'm gonna get rid of all this information. So this is just a flat shape. Okay. Now let's say we have light, and the light is coming from this direction. Okay. So on this flat shape, what parts would be facing like perpendicular to this direction? Okay, well, this is close, so that would turn like that. And this is close, so that would turn like that. And this part though, if you think about it, and you have light, and I'll just draw a bunch of lines because this is kind of how we can imagine it. And the light's all coming from one direction. Right? It's hitting all these spots, but notice how it can't really get into this area right here, like, because it's all coming from this direction. So it can hit here and here. It can hit all on this bottom lip and can't hit right in here, but it can hit here like that. And it can hit all the way up to there. So these are the spots, the green spots are the parts that light can hit. Okay, now I'm going to draw the parts that light can't hit. So it can't really touch that. Can't really touch any of that. It can touch all, maybe a bit of that it can't touch. So you've got like a little bit of green right there at the tip. And then under here, can't touch. And then all here, again, you can't touch it. All right, so now you have these red areas and these green areas. And what this is basically where the shadow goes. So all these red areas, all of this are the shadow. Now let's put that into practice on your face. So this area, the brow, that doesn't get any light, that can be one tone. That can be the shadow tone, right? But this area that does get light, that also can be simplified to one tone. So I'm just going to simplify this to either it's in the shadow or it's in the light. All right, so the nose, that's all light. And under the nose, all this, that's all shadow. So you actually would get like a block of shadow. Now you have the upper lip that's in shadow, but you have that small rim right there, that part right there, that would catch the light. Okay, now the lower lip is light, but then you have a shadow again. So beneath that is a shadow. Then again, we get back into the light, but then that lower part of the chin is in shadow. So, I mean, we've kind of just drawn a band for this face right here, you know, and it corresponds to this. So you've got like light, dark, see, light, and then shadow, light, shadow, light, small area of light, shadow, light, shadow, light, shadow. But that's what the planes are. Basically, you've got this, and then everywhere it's repeated in terms of where is light hitting, what would be in light, what would be in shadow. So, you know, you could, like, all of this area would be in the light. And if the light's coming from straight down, it'll hit this as well. But this part of the nose is sort of facing a bit to the side, so it's not going to be as bright. We can do something like that. Okay. And now you have, this is kind of similar to this, the side of the face, which is going to be not as bright. You also have the side. So here I'm making the side planes, the parts that are facing the side, as this color, this or this value. Parts that are facing down are this value. Now this part is actually facing down, but not as much as this part, for instance. So I'm going to make it a bit darker, but not super dark. And actually, I'm going to let it sort of roll in because this form turns. So as a form turns, that's where you add blending. So see how here you have a bunch of blended stuff? You would put that in the form turn, like that. And that implies that this face is turning around. Now, you also have side planes on the side of the chin, so we can put that in. And you have this part of the lips as well, here and here, which are facing the sides, so you can put that in. And then this is sort of all merging together. Okay, and so this is facing the front. Now the nose is at an angle. See how it's at an angle? So some parts of it are going to be getting more light and some are going to get less light. So let's just put that in. Okay, and let's treat all this as the underside of the, because it's all in the brow. Now with the eyes, they're a bit too bright for that. So I'm actually going to darken them because they're going to be in shadow. And you'll get like eyelashes. We'll make this darker. All right. So that's like a basic structure for the face. Then what you can do is sort of add all the slight changes. So for instance, this part of the nose, it's not just like this super sharp turn. You've got a transition. So you can put transition values, which are just when you put a middle value in between two other values. So for instance, this is a value, and this is a value, and if I put them right beside each other, you have an edge, right? So if you imagine like a box, that's the edge of the box, that's the edge of the box, maybe it's like that and like that, right? You can just imagine like a box there. Okay, but if I wanted to smooth this out like that, I can add a transition value, which is just, you know, in between these two. And now this is like a, I don't know, kind of reminds me of like a nut and a bolt, something like that. Like it turns, right? You now feel like before the form was doing this, went like that, and then it went like that. And now it feels like it's doing this, and then it goes like this, and then it goes like that. And that's because we put a value in between these two values. So that's what I'm doing with the nose. I'm basically just putting in a value in between these two values, and that's letting us know, okay, this is turning now, you know. Now, what you do is you have your big values and your big transitions, but then you're gonna start to break them down into smaller and smaller transitions, and that's what gets you a lot of detail and all these subtle values, because right now these are still pretty extreme. So for instance, you would think about how this is going to have a transition from the brow to this part, but then you're also going to get light that bounces from the nose back into this, so that's going to lighten up quite a bit, so it's not going to be as dark. Okay, then you have areas that are even brighter, like maybe the tip of the nose. We can go cooler here. Okay, so that's even brighter right there, so that becomes kind of like a highlight, and then you get a highlight there as well. and areas like here probably going to catch light because that's where a bone is and that's where it juts out a bit more. Okay, and then it rolls down, so then that you lose some of the light as you roll down this form. And then you have parts like this on the brow ridge, and that's gonna light up a bit, and you'll probably get some part on the forehead right there. Okay, so now I can go ahead and smooth out some of these edges where the form is turning. So whenever you have a shadow that is formed by the form turning, like this one right here, it's a form turning. It's this form, which is one form, and it's going this way and then this way and then this way, right? So it gets darker as the form turns away from the light. However, if I had an object here, like let's say there was a screen and that is blocking some of the light, I would get this blocking the light and creating a shadow on this surface. So that would get a shadow. So now I have a shadow on this plane. So what this is here is a form shadow. And what this is, form, is a cast shadow, because you're having a shadow cast on an object by another object, whereas a form shadow is when it's part of the form itself. So with cast shadows, you usually keep a harder edge here, like on the edge of that shadow is pretty sharp. Whereas a form shadow, in this case, it's a very solid form. So let's just blend it a bit. Let's curve this. See, as I blend this, what it's doing is it's saying that we're actually curving this surface on the corner. And that's why it's a smoother transition. As I blend this in, you're saying the form is turning in, and so you get this sort of soft edge. It's not such a hard transition. And that's what you want on certain areas of the skin. So for this part here, or even this part, see, let's say the lips, you've got this light, but this form is turning into the form of the lips. See right here, as a 2D example, this form turns, right? So what you can do is you can make that a soft edge, and it's going to look a lot more natural. And sometimes people forget this, to keep the lips really soft, because it's a form. It's part of your, right? Like you can touch your lips. It's not a sharp, it's not like paper that's folded. It's you know, got form there. So that becomes softer. But this part, the shadow being cast from the nose, actually can be a lot harder than this. So same with this, like this part of the nose is actually just the nose turning. And so you get a form turn. And so that's soft. But then this part right here is the shadow. So what else is going to happen? Well, underneath the nose, you're going to have like bouncing and hitting the skin and then bouncing back into the nose. So on the bottom of the nose, you're going to get some reflected light. So you can go ahead and put a little bit of light just underneath the nose. And now that's going to look like it's coming forward because you have a form that's got reflected light underneath it. All right, so get that in. I'm going to darken the edge of this nostril because that's what's happening. It's turning around. So you get a darker edge here and here. And now these forms are starting to read. And what that means is you can tell that they're three-dimensional. All right, we can do the same thing for the lip here. It's turning around and then it's going into the shadow. But there's also a cast shadow on the lips from the upper lip. So that shadow right here, let's just put it here, that's going to be hard. But then this part is going to be soft because that's just the lip turning and the skin, you know. So this part's all soft. Now you have kind of an abrupt change here in the planes. So I'm not going to keep it too soft, but I'm not going to keep it too hard either. It's still a form turn. All right. we start to blend all this together. As you blend it, you get those subtle shifts. And if you think about it, like your face is, you've got a skull and that's all hard form, but then you've got skin covering it and that softens everything. So it's kind of like if you had a box, right? Let's just say it's like a wooden crate, and you have that, and that's all hard and whatever, crate like, and then you put a blanket, like a plush blanket on top. So that's going to soften all these. So, like, you will get a transition between this being the top and this being the side, and this being the other side. You will have a transition there, but it's going to be pretty soft, especially on the corners. Gonna have some soft turns. And so the soft plush blanket in the case of, you know, our faces are, you've got fat, you've got muscle, and you've got skin on top of bone. So that's why we get so many soft transitions and so many tiny value changes. This is why it's super hard actually to paint faces, because you have to know all these tiny value changes. But not just that, each value change you put in says something. It's all telling some piece of information to the viewer. Like when I put that blending thing under the lips, what I'm saying is this is skin and it's softly changing form, right? And so you have to be super cognizant of that everything you do, every mark you make is really telling the story, and it may be changing the story from what you want it to be. And so, you know, you got to be very careful about where you put things. And in terms of, well, where do I put it? How do I know all this? Again, that comes back to studying. You know, you got to study the planes of the face. So here, the lower lids, they're going to kind of like the bottom of the nose. They're going to catch some light that's being bounced around. So I'm going to go ahead and put a little bit of reflected light in that too. Okay, so that's now looking a whole lot more like it makes sense. And then you've got, we'd have shadow under the neck, so let's just go ahead, put that in. And actually the entire neck itself is going to be darker than most of the skin. It's not going to be bright like this, because think about it, like your head is forward, right? If your neck is back here, and we think about all the places that light can't hit, almost the whole neck, usually anyway, is going to be a value step darker than, you know, the face, because it's all back and it's light's blocking it. Let's just do it before and after. Right? Like you can see how here the forms don't really read, and all your marks are contributing to the form not reading. And then here, it's like, okay, now you can feel the form. Now what you have lost is you've lost some color variation, some saturation, some texture and all that. But if you know all this going in, and then you start playing around, you don't have to worry so much. Like with this guy, and I think it's cool that you're using these bold colors and, you know, this very strong approach. But, you know, if you put the things in the right spot, it's going to read much better if you actually understand, well, yeah, well, this form turns, and you can understand things like, well, the forehead, it's a bony surface, so it's going to be more cool. So then you can go ahead and say, all right, let's screw around with things. Let's actually make this like a blue and throw in some blue in there. It's like, yeah, okay, that's cool. We're all artsy, and yeah, put blue everywhere and put blue on maybe the chin is not so bony. It's actually got some meat under there. So let's just say the cheeks are getting hot. So let's screw around and put some warms in there and on the nose and go pretty crazy, like right there. Let's put a hot color, and it's fine in the bottom of the neck, you can throw in some greens, and again, it's creating like, well, that's cool. Well, it's cool because you understand where to put these colors. You understand how you're screwing around with it. Whereas if you don't, and you're just putting style because maybe you've seen someone paint with a very stylistic approach, and they're just like doing it really cool and just putting marks down, and you're like, well, I want to do that. That looks really cool. Well, that's fine, but unless you have an understanding of these things, it's not gonna come across quite right. So yeah, the first thing is always fundamentals, always understanding comes first. And then comes all the, the tricks, the screwing around, the fancy pants stuff. So I'm just gonna go ahead and take a look at the rest of your gallery real quick. Okay, so this is an interesting idea. What I like is how you've got some shape to these forms, like a village or something, and you've got a river, some kind of cliff maybe. So yeah, I mean, it's good that you're thinking of these shapes. They're not that boring, but what you do need again is some understanding. If this is a cliff, there's probably good to show how the form turns. If this house is that much closer to us, you could actually make it bigger and show what the rest of these, well, okay, now we're off the cliff, but show what the rest of these houses are supposed to be. Maybe it has a chimney or something. Still pretty close to that cliff. It's just there. He's safe now. All right. So, just think about the thing a bit more. And then the composition as well. I would actually, like, this is, if you view it from a distance, your composition is like this. And then you have this big thing. Might be cooler if it goes actually further out and more like that. And so what I would do is, how can we do this? Probably best to just liquefy it. Just for an example, you could take all this and move all this composition more like that. And then it's just going to be a cooler shape. See, like that is much more exciting in a way compared to that. Just feels a bit, it's okay. It's a bit flaccid, I guess. This is more, so this stuff, okay, fine, cool. You're still playing around. You got your textury brush. Looks like you did this from reference, which is good. Keep doing more from reference. But again, really remember that every mark you make, especially textured marks, because textured marks really show the information. They show, this is what I'm trying to tell you. Like, if you use a textured brush, right, you put a piece of grass and you do something like that. Let me see if I have another texture brush. I don't know. Like, you do, okay, never mind, not that one. Sorry, I suck with texture. All right. Stick with the paintbrush. That, I'm saying, okay, the grass is growing up, like straight up. But if I do this, I'm saying the grass is growing like at an angle. And if I do this, I'm saying, okay, it's on a hill or something like that. Each stroke you make, because it has texture, it tells a lot of information. Whereas if you do all this sort of carelessly, then you're not actually telling people the right thing. You're telling them something completely different. Okay, value study. I can tell your values are wrong, but we could talk about this again. If you submit your reference for the studies, and then, I can critique that. And then, yeah, more stuff. And more hands, very Synyxy hands, which, I don't know. I guess it's something. He likes to put a lot of space between the fingers. I feel that's kind of a very Synyxy thing to do. You know, like it feels like his style, and I think it works for him. In terms of you doing it, just make sure you're doing it because you see the world like that, and not because someone else did it. Because when it comes to style, it should be something personal and something that you observe from life, and then you interpret the way you want to, or something that you like, as opposed to just, okay, I saw this artist who draws like this, and I think that's cool, so I'm going to do that. I mean, that can work to a point, but I don't really condone doing things without understanding. So anyway, this is the most important thing, you know, planes of the face, really understand them. Understand that, you know, this thing, it's really important that each plane, each value change is saying something, you know. If I put shadow here, it's saying, well, you know, because the cheeks go in, right? So, yeah, understand that. And I hope this helped, and thanks for watching.